Okay, so welcome, bienvenidos. Welcome to the Cross Cultural Center's cross-cultural webinar dedicated to Black excellence in education. So we have an excellent session today brought to you by Dr. Amechi. But before we introduce Dr. Amechi, we would like to introduce a little bit about what is the project called Empoderación en Educación, Empowerment in Education, which is a project dedicated to fostering the voices of scholars, activists, artists dedicated to the success of underserved students from K through 12 to post-secondary and higher education. But a little bit more about the project from our student leaders.
Mentioned by Dr. Vanessa Falcón, Empoderación en la Educación is a series of lectures, symposiums, and activities both online and in person dedicated to amplifying underrepresented success stories in higher education. These events are parallel with our Heritage Months, highlighting Black, Native, undocumented, and LGBTQ+ scholars, educators, and activists in education. In this session, we will be having Dr. Mauriell Amechi. And Dr. Mauriell Amechi is a social scientist, professor, consultant, and nationally sought after speaker with an enduring commitment to social justice and education equity, particularly improving post-secondary education and workforce outcomes for marginalized learners. Previously, he served on the Old Dominion University and the University of Redlands faculty, producing policy-relevant research and teaching classes in higher education / student affairs administration. Inspired by his lived experience in kinship foster care, Dr. Amechi's research agenda aims to understand and identify protective factors and policies that ensure more equitable education experiences and workforce outcomes among adolescents aging out of foster care. His novel research agenda emphasizes the emic insider perspective, based on the presumption that oppressed communities possess solutions to the conundrums they face within their wisdom. In 2020, Dr. Amechi founded Foster Youth Empowered, a mission-driven consulting firm that endeavors to close inequities in high school and college completion among underserved youth impacted by foster care system. Drawing upon the latest research and critical lessons from his lived experiences. A native of Chicago, he earned his BA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and master's from Ohio State University. He holds a PhD in educational leadership and policy analysis from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Dr. Mauriell Amechi.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Before we get started, I did want to share a short video clip, maybe the first minute and a half, that highlights the voices of young people impacted by foster care systems. Through my work, I always try to center the voices of young people impacted by the problems that I study, because I believe that oppressed communities possess the solutions to some of the conundrums that they face on a daily basis. So we're going to start off with the video now.
COVID-19 has recently changed my life because, to be honest, it has triggered a lot of past childhood traumas. For example, food insecurity. I don't feel like I have access to enough food all the time. I feel nervous about having to either go out and get it or spending extra money for delivery services. And then also just feeling like I'm separated from my family again, and I have no control to change that. And I have no idea when I'll see them again.
Because of this coronavirus, I lost housing. I've been struggling with my online classes, but most importantly, with my emotions. It's brought me back to a dark place, making me feel like I don't have a support system, not being able to fall back on anyone, having to house couch around. I feel like I have a home.
I'm sick, and my doctor believed that I had contracted the virus as well. So I've been off of work for for some days now and will be off. In addition, my other job that I depend on, my part-time job, had to close as well. And that's closed without any pay. There's no telling when, unfortunately, they'll be able to open back up.
COVID-19 has changed my life by completely displacing my academic classes in person and my employment, as well as making it impossible to see my younger sister who doesn't live with me.
And being forced to be put into this predicament has tremendously psyched me out, put me in a lot of situational depression, and just trying to get up and motivate myself to do the work is hard. I work 7 jobs. I'm an essential worker. So I've gone 72 hours without sleep. And not the fact that I'm actually couch surfing right now and I'm homeless because of ripple effects that have happened prior to this virus. I can't even find a place to stay or continue my search for renting a place or anything because no one's answering their phones.
Thank you for sharing that video clip. This video was recorded during the earlier parts of the pandemic. It was published April 30th, 2021. As we come towards the end of what may become the official end of the pandemic this upcoming May, we're expecting President Biden to announce the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as you can see from the video, during some of the earlier stages of the pandemic, young people with a history of foster care were dealing with significant challenges in adapting to the closure of their college campuses, particularly young people that were housing insecure, young people that were food insecure. As a young man shared in the last clip, he was living in his car to make his way through the pandemic. And these are some of the issues that college campuses unfortunately have ignored for such a long time, under the presumption that these young people have family support in their lives, or family privilege, as we say in academic spaces. But unfortunately, higher education continues to be designed to support individuals who come from a quote unquote traditional family. And that's not the case. That wasn't the case for me, myself, when I was transitioning from high school to college. I was adopted and raised by my late grandmother, who passed away my senior year of high school. And my transition was unique in that way because I didn't necessarily have any significant familial support outside of my siblings, who mostly provided emotional support. And so thinking about how these young people were forced to deal with this global health crisis while not having the support of their institutions is a reason why we have to start to center the success of college students with foster care experience, which is the title of my presentation today. So once again, the title of my presentation today is Centering the Success of College Students with Foster Care Experience. I won't repeat my introduction, but I do want to say that I'm the CEO and founder of Foster Youth Empowered, which is an education consulting firm committed to promoting educational resilience and equity in high school and college completion for young people aging out of foster care. I also won't repeat my research agenda since that was really nicely highlighted by Christy as well. Let's dive straight into my presentation. So today I have several questions that I hope to unpack through this presentation, touching on issues such as how foster care is defined in this country, as well as some of the leading factors that contribute to foster care entry. I'm also going to discuss some of the demographic trends that we see across this nation as it relates to youth and foster care. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the national trends that we see across the public foster care system. And then I want to dive into the outcomes. What do we know about young people aging out of foster care who go to college? And also, how can we affect change on a local and national level by having college leaders as well as state and federal policymakers implement the changes needed to help this population navigate this COVID-19 recovery phase. So foster care is defined as 24-hour substitute care for children taken away from their parents or guardian and for whom the state or tribal agency has placement and care responsibility. This includes, but is not limited to, placement in family foster homes, group homes, emergency shelters, the homes of relatives, as well as childcare facilities. There are several factors that may contribute to foster care entry, including neglect, abuse, drug abuse specifically, the inability of a caretaker to cope with personal challenges or poverty, physical abuse, and housing insecurity. To be clear, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are among the 5 leading factors that contribute to foster care entry. But I want to draw us attention to housing insecurity. If we think about what causes housing insecurity, the root causal factor is poverty. And we know in this country, communities of color have historically suffered from housing insecurity because of their socioeconomic status, their lack of financial resources to afford housing in this country, which we know has continued to increase rapidly during the pandemic. And as a result of this housing insecurity, we tend to see communities of color overrepresented within the foster care system. But I wanted to point that out because as we talk about some of the demographic trends, which we see are racialized, I want you to understand part of the reason that these communities are overrepresented within the foster care system is because it's rooted in poverty and how we criminalize poverty and police poverty in this nation. So let's take a closer look at some of the demographic trends in foster care. The following chart reflects population estimates. The gray bar represents the total number of youth in the foster care system by the end of the fiscal year, whereas the blue bar represents the number of youth served by the foster care system over the course of the fiscal year. So from January to December, the gray bar represents the total number of children present in the foster care system by the end of the year, whereas the blue bar represents the number of children served over the course of the fiscal year. So from January to March, someone may be in the foster care system, but they may leave in March. And so that is what's captured in the blue bar. And so what we see is that on average, there are about 670,000 young people that enter and exit the foster care system each year. Estimates from federal data also indicate that the total number of children present in the foster care system on any given day exceeds over 425,000 youth. So this is a major problem in this nation. Although the root cause of this upward trend is unclear, as you can see, there's an upward trend in the number of kids impacted by foster care. It has been speculated that the national opioid crisis or drug crisis may be partly responsible. In 2018, we see that there is a moderate drop in foster care placements. Although this is a positive trend, the global health emergency caused by COVID-19 will likely reverse some of this progress, but those trends remain to be seen. What we did notice so far based off the pandemic is that first responders tend to be teachers who have an opportunity to see their students up close on a daily basis and see some of the challenges that their students are dealing with. Because of the pandemic, we know that students were not able to attend school in person. And so that affected the number of first responders alerting child welfare agencies that there may be a case of abuse or neglect on the part of the parent. And so there wasn't uptick of young people entering foster care during the pandemic, although we typically see an increase during disasters. We typically see the population of youth increase during disasters, but that wasn't the case during the pandemic because first responders were not able to see their students up close on a daily basis. So now I want to talk about some other demographic trends, children in foster care. You may be wondering, what are the odds of a kid entering foster care? Well, 1 in 17 US children will enter the foster care system at some point in their lives. That's nearly 1 in 10. That's nearly 10% of all children in this country will experience foster care, which means that this problem has become very normalized for certain communities. In terms of the median age for children in foster care, the age is 7. And in terms of the number of months or time that they spend in foster care, typically averages out to 13 months. However, that is the average. Of course, there are outliers. There are young people that spend several years, multiple years within the foster care system. And those youth typically are in situations where their parents' rights have been terminated and they're unable to return to the custody of their guardians. But in terms of gender demographics, we see male and female children enter foster care at proportional rates. As you may imagine, children in the foster care system reflect the broader diversity that we see in the US. However, children of color make up more than half of the US foster care system. A closer look at racial demographics reveals that certain racial groups continue to be overrepresented. For instance, Black children are represented in foster care 1.6 times their rate in the general population. Similarly, Native American youth are represented 2.4 times their rate in the general population. And biracial, multiracial youth are represented nearly 2 times their rate in the general population. So what these data points suggest is that racially marginalized communities are more likely to be impacted by the child welfare system. This next slide highlights some of the demographics trends we see by race across certain states. Despite a decline in the proportion of Black youth in foster care nationally, a number of states saw spikes in this population. Placements among Black youth surged nearly 200% in New Hampshire between 2011 and 2017, 80% in Minnesota, 55% in Georgia, 51% in Indiana, and 44% in Arizona. Similarly, states with large Native American populations recorded a dramatic influx of placements among Native youth. Foster care entry increased by nearly 150% in Minnesota alone, 52% in Arizona, 72% in Wisconsin, 63% in North Dakota, and 83% in Montana. Cutting-edge research in the field of neuroscience calls into question the long-held belief that adolescence ends at 18. In fact, neuroscientists have now discovered that brain maturation extends into the mid-20s. Historically, young people in foster care have been expected to become self-sufficient adults when they turn 18. However, I'm sure most of us on the Zoom would agree that we still have some maturation to do, some growth to do when we were 18-year-olds. With the growing recognition that most young people are not prepared for self-sufficiency at 18, states now have the option to extend foster care, which allows foster youth to delay emancipation or aging out and states receive reimbursement for some of the transitional services provided between the ages of 18 and 21. And in some cases, California, for example, young people aging out of foster care may access transitional services until they turn 26. So if they want to go to college and they want financial support with going to college, they can access those benefits through the age of 26. The following slide highlights the total number of states with extended foster care, which we see now includes about 30 states today, and 9 tribal agencies offer extended foster care, including the Navajo Nation, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, Penobscot Nation, Mashpee, Wampanoag tribe, among several others. But what's important to note there is that there are also several states, about 20 states, that have failed to provide extended foster care to young people aging out, and that places them at a significant risk of experiencing some of the deficit outcomes that we see commonly associated with young people with a history of foster care. The federal government, however, recognizes that older youth aging out of foster care face unique disadvantages in their transition to adulthood, and understand that they are more susceptible to deficit outcomes such as homelessness, unemployment, severe mental health issues, and criminality. Therefore, the John Chafee Foster Care Program was created to support all young people who have experienced foster care between the ages of 14 and 21 in their transition to adulthood. Some of the services provided include help with the completion of a high school diploma or GED. What often happens, particularly for young people in foster care, is that they experience multiple foster home placements, which disrupts their educational experiences, particularly when they're in high school or even elementary school. And they often fall off the track. They often fall off the pathway to high school completion. And many of them are forced to attend alternative schools or community colleges to complete a GED. So this support is really, really critical. They receive support with independent living skills, whether it's learning how to do laundry, whether it's learning how to cook, whether it's learning how to pay manage one's finances. We all need financial literacy skills as young adults. And unfortunately, this particular group of young people are in situations and circumstances that place them at a disadvantage in learning these independent living skills. Even how to get a license for a car, they often struggle with that type of support as well. They get support with career aspiration and placement. Because some young people have very negative experiences in high school and elementary school, they may not necessarily be motivated to go directly to college. And so it's not uncommon for this particular population of young people to delay college enrollment. And so career aspiration and job placement is something that these young people really, really need as they're transitioning from the foster care system to self-sufficiency in adulthood. Preventative health activities. Unfortunately, we tend to see a significant number of female youth in foster care become teenage parents, and that places them at a significant disadvantage in terms of their self-sufficiency as well. So they get help with preventative health activities. Post-secondary education and vocational training. We see a large number of young people aspire to go to college, and we see some of them that actually do immediately enroll in college right after high school. Educational training vouchers are a form of financial aid that these young people are qualified to receive for up to 5 years. And these vouchers are similar to Pell Grants, they're able to apply these vouchers towards their educational expenses during college. And lastly, housing assistance. There's a program called the Family Unification Program that helps these young people find subsidized housing so that they don't have to worry about fully covering some of the living expenses that that comes with becoming a young adult. Next, I want to talk to you about aging out of foster care. Each year, we see about 20,000 young people age out of the foster care system and begin the transition to adulthood. Around 70% of these young people aspire to attend college, yet enrollment, persistence, and attainment rates among foster youth remain alarmingly low. In fact, it's not uncommon for these young people to delay college enrollment. And similar to, and although I should say 70%, we see, such a huge number of them aspire to go to college, we only see about a third of them, around 30% or 35% of them actually enroll in college right after high school. And so there's a significant gap between the 70% to 80% that aspire to go to college and the 30 to 35% that actually do enroll in college. However, it should be noted that the enrollment rates look differently depending on the state in which you examine. Some states, as I mentioned earlier, provide extended foster care. And one of the benefits that some of these states that provide extended foster care do is they provide tuition waivers. So they fully waive the cost of tuition to whatever state-based school that the young person would like to go to. And that removes significant financial barriers that stand in the way of them going to college, particularly if we think about a major four-year university, but even some community colleges, the hidden expense of paying for housing is a challenge for a young person going to a community college versus a four-year institution where housing may not necessarily be available. So there's research that suggests states that provide tuition waivers slightly influence higher enrollment rates, about 12% higher enrollment rates in states with tuition waivers available to young people. Ultimately, I would like to see this number double because I feel that more young people should be benefiting from some of these financial resources provided through the federal government and provided through their state to help them earn a college education. Similar to other underrepresented groups in higher education, unfortunately, fewer students with foster care experience enroll at a four-year institution. And estimates show that about two-thirds of them enroll at a two-year college. So you may be wondering, what happens once they enroll in college? What are their completion rates and outcomes? Well, a significant body of research has documented the disparate college completion outcomes among students with foster care experience. The following chart highlights a comparison of the college completion outcomes among students with foster care experience, low-income students, and all other students. This study, this visual, I should say, is based off data from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Survey from the year 2011 to 2012. And researchers found that a majority of foster youth who pursue a post-secondary education fall short of completion. Specifically, we only see about 29% of foster youth complete either an associate's or bachelor's degree within 6 years. And that's in comparison to about 50% of all other students and about 40% of other low-income students that are successful. But if we look specifically at the type of degree that they're completing, for example, the blue area represents associate degrees. We only see about 15% success rate at the two-year level. And then we only see about a 14% success rate for individuals that pursue a 4-year degree, but may take 6 years to complete their degree. And so there's a significant disparity here that has remained unaddressed for a long time. And that's part of the problem that we need to be really attentive to as we enter this COVID-19 recovery phase of the pandemic. Because a lot of these young people, as you saw from the video, experienced significant disruptions at the start of the pandemic. So what measures can policymakers implement to help aid students with foster care experience during this post-pandemic recovery? I believe that all 50 states should authorize extended foster care. At least 20 states have yet to extend foster care beyond the age 18, which put these young people at a severe disadvantage in transitioning to adulthood. Therefore, I believe that state policymakers should authorize extended foster care in all 50 states post-pandemic to ensure that foster youth aging out have access to the essential supports and resources that they need. Secondly, I believe that federal policymakers should also increase CHAFE funding through the CHAFE funding to help cover the full cost of tuition. What often happens in a lot of states is when these young people receive multiple sources of financial aid, institutions tend to remove the internal institutional funding that they provide. So if an institution was to award, and this actually happened to me in my experience transitioning to college. I applied to over 30 scholarships. I was very motivated my senior year, and 40 scholarships, and I received about 40% of them from what I recall. So I got nearly half of the scholarships that I was awarded. But because I was awarded a full tuition scholarship through my State Department of Children and Family Services here in Illinois, the university began to withdraw some of the scholarships that they were offering me as well. And so that places young people at a disadvantage because we know financial aid offers typically do not cover the full cost of attendance. They do not cover the cost of some of the educational supplies that we need. It doesn't cover sometimes the cost of the housing expenses that we occur, especially if you think about living off campus. And so I believe there's an opportunity for the federal government to increase CHAFE funding. Next, I think it's also important for them to waive some of the CHAFE program restrictions that limit subsidies provided for housing. And also, I think it's really important that they extend eligibility for housing assistance programs, such as the Family Unification Program. Foster youth may be eligible for housing subsidies provided through the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Family Unification Program. However, these young people are expected to spend up to 30% of their income towards housing, and the government covers the remaining 70%. However, eligibility for this program is restricted to young people who are at least 18 years old, but no more than 24. And many students with foster care experience may delay college enrollment. And as a result, they may lose eligibility for this type of benefit. As we know, higher education across the board, all sectors experience significant declines in enrollment. So what that means is that young people aging out of foster care are among those who are delaying college enrollment. And so with the some of the age restrictions that are placed on some of these benefits that these young people can benefit from, it limits their ability to leverage them. And so there needs to be some flexibility in terms of some of the age requirements for these programs. And finally, there's an opportunity for higher education institutions across the board to finally recognize foster youth as a distinct marginalized population. And what that means is that institutions should focus on strengthening the post-secondary data that they have on students on the experiences of students with foster care, with the history of foster care, as well as strengthening data on their outcomes. Institutions fail to track the number of foster youth that they have on their campuses in many institutions. And as a result, they're unable to provide the aid and assistance that they need. And that is just simply unacceptable. There are opportunities for colleges to implement identifiers in the college application process beyond the personal statement that allows someone to say, hey, I'm aging out of foster care. I may need more help to navigate my experience at this college. And I think a lot of institutions have failed to place these identifiers, these opportunities for these young people to identify themselves in the college enrollment process. And so that aid goes unprovided. So you also may be wondering, what measures can college administrators implement to aid students with foster care experience during this post-pandemic recovery? First, I think it's important that institutions prioritize students with foster care experience for financial aid and prohibit scholarship displacement. Scholarship displacement is what I talked about on the last slide, where institutions withdraw their institutional funding if young people receive external scholarships. I also believe it's important for colleges to make note of the significant hardship experienced by students who are housing insecure during the pandemic, with foster youth being one of the primary groups that were affected by housing insecurity. So offering students the opportunity to remain in campus residence halls all year round is really, really critical to their success. And it's something that some institutions already provide for international students. So why not extend that benefit to young people aging out of foster care? Next, I think it's important to provide access to counseling services. As we know, the pandemic had a significant impact on all of our mental health, the social isolation, the lack of opportunities to receive support and encouragement from our peers, from our teachers and our professors, led to heightened levels of anxiety and depression amongst all students, and especially young people aging out of foster care. And so colleges have to be responsive to the needs of their students as we try to enter this post-pandemic recovery phase. It's really important that we provide them with the mental health services that they need. And specifically, not just anybody, but someone who is trained and understands some of the unique challenges that this particular population face on a daily basis, so that they could be coachly responsive to the needs of these students. Next, or lastly, I think it's really critical for campuses to create support programs tailored to the unique needs and challenges faced by students with a history of foster care. A program may not be necessary for every single institution, but institutions that are collecting data on their student enrollments and identify a critical mass of foster youth, those institutions have an opportunity to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment by creating programs tailored to the needs of these students. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, but I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation, and I welcome any questions and comments that you have regarding my talk today, or about my own transition from high school to college and factors that have played a role in my success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amechi. I just want to welcome the audience to provide a virtual round of applause here as before we transition to Q&A. So in regards to Q&A, Christy and I are here to help. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them here in the chat box and we will relay your questions here in the session. But also you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you would rather ask your question that way. So as we allow the audience to enter their questions, we have a few questions as well. Actually, many questions, just overall, thank you for your brilliance, excellence, talent in this very, very important work. Critical for really in all higher education overall, but specifically also to consider in higher education, because many times we think of foster youth and we think of this experience of being a childhood challenge, obstacle, to say the least, right? But forgetting really that foster youth continue to need support in higher education and post-secondary higher education as well. So that is why this session is so important, critical, and also groundbreaking to consider centering the success of foster youth at this level in education. So I think it's just noteworthy to mention the importance of this session, and specifically for us as well as educators at SDSU Imperial Valley, and for those other who may be joining us from other higher education institutions. So I just wanted to mention that. But also, again, welcoming the audience to ask your questions. Please feel free to type them here in the chat box. One question I have, and this is more for me to to learn about how to continue to support foster youth at the higher education level. I really appreciated your recommendations from policy to practice, and I think it's something that we can all apply, specifically the practice recommendations. But specifically for the program, the SDSU-IV program, so this is something new. I just learned about it here in your session. How can, whether it be higher education or community college institutions, how can they get involved with the program? What is the process? I know you mentioned that funding is needed to increase in the program, and I agree, absolutely. But how do we get involved?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the challenges that we see is that there's a disconnect between child welfare agencies, K-12 institutions, and higher education institutions. They're not communicating. So even though the child welfare agency may be very familiar with the SDSU-IV foster care success program, when a young person is transitioning from high school to college, they're often interacting with staff members similar to yourself that are unfamiliar with these resources and these benefits and services that are available to them. And what often happens is that these young people go their whole college experience and never get a chance to utilize them. And so what I've advocated for in some of my recent writings, some of my blog writings that I share with you all, is there needs to be more cross-system engagements. There needs to be more interactions between the child welfare agencies, the local child welfare agencies in your communities, and your campus. There needs to be an opportunity for you all to engage in conversations to learn about, the resources that are available for a young person aging out of foster care, that you can make sure that you remind that student that they're eligible for, that they can benefit for, even if they're not aware of it. And I think it starts with communication. And unfortunately, there's this notion that within the foster care system, at least, the focus is only on making sure that these young people finish high school, but there's not enough focus on making sure that these young people go to college. And unfortunately, these resources go unused. These financial resources, similar to, we know that billions of dollars each year in Pell Grant goes unused, and these people are, these students are eligible for, Pell Grants each year. And I think we can help break down these communication gaps by engaging with each other. And I think starting with your local child welfare agency is one way that you can start to learn more about these resources and begin to close the communication gap.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Now, on the topic of Q&A, do we have any questions from the audience?
I do have a question for Dr. Amechi. So my question to you is a little bit more personal. So was peer support a big push to help you through the higher education system? And did you ever take a gap year due to financial hardships through graduate school?
That's a great question. My biggest motivation for pursuit of a higher education was me realizing at a very young age that my education would be my way out of poverty, would be my way out of the unfortunately the impoverished community that I came from here on the west side of Chicago. I knew that I did want to take a gap year because I may not live if I take a gap year. Personal story is that I was robbed at gunpoint my senior year of high school. And there's a lot of young people that experience that traumatic experience as well. A lot of young people that are doing good things in this world, but get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that was what I experienced on New Year's Eve when I was a senior in high school. But I survived that experience, and I knew that I needed to get out of my community. I need to further my education, and I knew that going away for college would be my way to do so. And so, that just made me even more motivated, knowing that God had given me a second chance to continue doing His will on this earth. And I did decide to take a gap year. A few months later after that experience, my grandmother passed away 2 months before my high school graduation. And, at the time I was still struggling to figure out which college I wanted to go to. My high school counselor, Ms. Gonzalez, was really, really discouraged when I got denied admission to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, because she was like, Mauriell, you're the type of student that they always talk about wanting to recruit. And she was like, you should go through the appeal process and talk about some of the personal challenges that you are dealing with at home. And she told me about, the ability to appeal the denial that I received from the business school. I wanted to be in the business school specifically, which is one of our top schools, most competitive schools to get into. At that point, I had been admitted to 3 other business schools, including our branch campus, University of Illinois, Chicago. So I was like, okay, I don't necessarily want to stay in Chicago because of some of the violence that I've experienced firsthand, but I also do want to be a business major. But my high school counselor pushed me to appeal the decision. I wrote a new personal statement, sent in my latest transcripts, and I was admitted a general education major, and I went straight to college. And I didn't look back. Once I got to college, I was involved in campus support programs like TRIO, and specifically the McNair Scholars Program. I'm not sure if you all have heard of that, but that program was transformational for me. Introduced me to research. And from that point on, I knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD, and I got connected to the right resources that I needed to pursue a PhD. And I knew that I didn't want to take any breaks in between, because I knew that it was going to be a long journey to finishing my PhD. And so I'm proud to say that I finished my PhD at the age of 28. And I became a professor by the age of 29. And I was a professor for 3 years before transitioning into my current role as a senior policy analyst. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Great. It just comes to show that, that persistence and that, and I hate to say the word resiliency because, kids shouldn't have to be resilient, or young people shouldn't have to through all these adversities, but you really, your personal experience just really puts into perspective, like throughout hardships, you were able to push through, and thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you so much for the question.
Yes, and I think it also highlights the importance of allies. I do want to mention a comment about allies, but before commenting on allies, do we have any other questions from the audience? Okay, So we do want to be mindful of schedule. So if you have any last questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box or unmute yourself and you can ask these questions that way. But as we are here, we do want to take the opportunity just to highlight Dr. Amechi's work. So Dr. Amechi, if you have any resources, for example, link to your website, I know you have many publications as well that we're happy to share with our audience. Please feel free to either type it in the chat box or send it our way, and we'll be happy to relay this this information because on the topic of allies, for us as educators and agents of change in higher education, it is a continuous work to develop our cultural competency, our cultural humility, and continue to build our understanding of our diverse student communities. So continuing to learn about who our students are, and foster youth is one of those. We need to really understand what are their lived realities, what are the challenges, and how can we support in their success, because as you can hear by Dr. Amechi's story, an ally can really make a difference. So that's why this session is really important, and continue to learn and read about this work is also paramount. Okay, so as we conclude our session, I do want to ask one concluding question, and this will be more of support for our younger audience and students who might be tuning in now, or if not at a later time seeing our recording. But my question is, if you could give yourself a piece of advice, if you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would you say?
It's a great question. It's a hard question to answer because there's so many lessons that I've had on this journey to today, and I think one piece of advice that I would tell myself if I was able to at a younger age would be to just enjoy the journey. I have been a very driven and self-motivated individual, obviously, and I think that has been one of my biggest strengths. My self-discipline. However, it's also good to enjoy college and have fun. And I think, you only get one college experience, those first 4 years, if you go to a 4-year institution. And so make sure you enjoy the journey as much as well. So finding that balance is really important. I did, have some fun during college, but it was a lot of hard work to get to my position. And I've had allies, I've had mentors that have, reminded me along the way, hey, Mauriell, you gotta enjoy life as well. It can't just be about academics. And so I'm finally in the place where I want to be. I'm a homeowner now here in Chicago. And one of my hobbies is traveling. And so outside of going to conferences, which are another way to travel, but just going on vacations to different places is one of my hobbies that I try to maximize in my free time. So yeah, that would be my advice, would be to find a balance between school life, work life, and personal life, because all of those elements are important.
Great, thank you for that advice. And with this question, we will conclude our Q&A and overall session. But before we end, we just want to provide you with the opportunity to share any last comments, insights that maybe you didn't have a chance to share during your session.
Well, I just want to, thank you all for giving me the space to be here with you all virtually for this event. I've always wanted to be a invited speaker for a Black History Month event. And so thank you, Dr. Falcon, for this invitation once again. And I want to thank everybody who joined the session. Thank you for being my audience today my engaged audience today. And thank you all for all the questions that you all posed, and I wish you all much success for the students on this call and your journeys this year. And if I can ever be of any support, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. And with this note, we will conclude our questions. So we look forward to being in contact, community, and in solidarity. Bye.
Awesome. Take care.